Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is a commentary about Mr. Steven Crowder's views on building the wall. That's to say, the border barrier between the United States and Mexico. So it's a cause célèbre of Trumpists, including Mr. Crowder. In case you don't know, Steven Crowder is a Canadian-American. He's living in Texas, and he's got his own radio show, Loud with Crowder, and there's a fantastic series of that where he sets up his stall on the street, literally, and welcomes any passerby to come and engage him in conversation. Change My Mind is the name of the series, and there will be a tendentious question of public concern that will be the theme for that day, and inviting all comers to discuss this issue with him. Obviously, he's looking for those who espouse the countervailing view, and he claims to be open-minded, willing to have his mind changed. Having said that, I've not seen a single edition where he does change his mind. I think it was John Stuart Mill who said, "When I realise I'm wrong, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?" And I've changed my mind on a number of topics. I used to be more right-wing than I currently am, although it's possibly that right-wing parties like, say, the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom or the Republican Party of the United States have gone a bit mental. Anyway, when it comes to President Trump's much vaunted border barrier, even Trump's not always calling it a wall these days, Mr. Crowder is one of those who's agitating for it. Build up that wall. Now, there are a number of flaws and hypocrisies with Mr. Crowder's position, because it certainly conflicts with some of his other avowed beliefs. How about the free market? Because he seems to be a free market fundamentalist, always demanding that there must be pure capitalism. So if you have a free market, then you would need free labour, right? So people are free to sell their labour, just people are able to hire their labour. And if people want to come from Mexico or other countries to the United States and work for less than Americans are working, well, more power to their elbow. And that'll reduce wages, it'll reduce the cost of various goods and services. And so why should we worry about legality or illegality? Come one, come all. That's what a free market is. So he doesn't really believe in a free market. I don't completely believe in a free market either, by the way, and I do believe in having some restrictions on immigration. But Mr. Crowder, if you're that capitalist, you would say, no, I don't care. Even if the wages of the American worker fall through the floor, so be it. Competition is good for the consumer. If somebody's willing to work for $1 an hour, well, that's to be welcomed. And the rest of you are just too greedy. And it may not just be undercutting American workers in terms of salaries. It might be that people from Mexico, Guatemala, wherever it is, are harder working. They could be more talented. They could be more highly qualified. They might be bilingual, whereas Americans are generally monolingual. And Mr. Crowder, he often propounds this irrefrangible principle of private property. It's sacrosanct. It's inviolable, except when it comes to building this wall. Because what do people refuse to sell? And the property that they need to build this wall on belongs to myriad private individuals, companies, sometimes state governments. So what if they refuse to sell? Well, Congress might have to pass some appropriation bill or compulsory purchase order, and there could be court battles. But anyway, supposing the federal government wins these court battles, it's sequestering private property. You give them some money. But what is this bugbear of his that Mr. Crowder always brings up when he's trying to scare people away from socialism? His fear-mongering is always guys with guns coming to your house in the middle of the night to take your stuff, which is precisely what he is agitating. Supposing you refuse to leave your property, you refuse to hand over whatever it is, if push comes to shove, the federal government would have to send in the FBI or whoever it is to take your property, to remove you from it. People, if they start trying to stop the border wall being built, lying down from bulldozers, that's what's going to happen. So exactly the nightmare scenario that he keeps bringing up, that's his boogeyman. But anyway, he's so pro-guns, he should want guns everywhere, including for the federal government. But he's completely opposed to appropriating property to help the needy, including money, including sort of a reasonable level of taxation from multi-billion dollar corporations which make fat profits every year, or multi-billionaires. They can sort their money away in offshore tax havens or just call it something else, or put it in your granddaughter's name, or any way to hide it to reduce your tax liability. Because if they paid a decent amount of tax, that could fund so much more in terms of public services, or fund this wall, for instance. Anyway, so some of the property belongs to state governments, and what if they refuse to play ball? What happened to states' rights? Mr. Crowder is supposed to believe in that. He's always saying, federal government, Governor Washington, railing against them as though the fact it's in Washington is the problem, or the federal government is necessarily bad. That must be always worse than at a state level. I know there's this principle of subsidiarity, that decisions are best taken at a local level. Now, net immigration is a federal issue, not a state issue, but his barrier that he's demanding might require compulsorily taking land from state governments. Anyway, so here he is calling for big government, and then he always eschews big government on other issues when it's to do with tackling poverty or, I don't know, climate change, things of that nature, and more spending. Or you want to reduce tax, we've got to have no barrier, so make your mind up. More federal government. So Trump is talking about a state of emergency, and Crowder so far hasn't called it a state of emergency. It is not an emergency. I remember it's difficult to know the level of crossings, because if we really knew the level, then the people would have been caught. You can only say the number of people who have been caught. And 2016 was the lowest year since 1971, if I've got that year. Now, that doesn't prove that it's the lowest number of illegal immigrants coming, just the lowest across that border. They can be coming through Canada, they can come in through legal ports and just not leaving. And as for people, do we catch 50% of them? Well, not we, the United States, I'm not American. Do you catch 20% of them, 70% of them? I don't know. And the percentage you catch from year to year is going to vary. Some years, more people will be caught than others. The authorities will be more efficient, some years less efficient, or just be overwhelmed by the number of people coming illegally. So it's a very blunt instrument. It's difficult to extrapolate from that the actual number of illegal immigrants. But it would appear that illegal immigration, certainly across the Mexican border, not through legal ports of entry, coming illegally, not just staying illegally, it would appear that 2016 was a very, very low year for that. And yet, the rhetoric has been ramped up to fever pitch. So if Trump declares a state of emergency, it would be completely inapposite and just preposterous. When it's not an emergency, no one's ever said it's been an emergency before, even though there's been far higher levels of illegal immigration. And that would be big government at its biggest. There's not a war or anything like that. And the Army Corps of Engineers would have to build a barrier. So what? You can't have the federal government doing it. The Army is the federal government. That's big government. That's against Mr. Crowder's principles. I don't know if he's particularly advocated for the Army building it. The US Army is obviously funded by taxes, federal taxes, which is even worse. Why not have free enterprise build it and free enterprise patrol it? Always free enterprise. They're always better. Federal government is necessarily bad. So Mr. Crowder seems to believe. In fairness to him, he does say there are things which are public good, like courts, the police, the military, and so on. But anyway, I just wanted to expose how he often contradicts what are supposed to be the core principles of his Weltanschauung, just because he's so eager to keep down illegal immigration. And I realise illegal immigration is a problem and ought to be stopped. Like most problems, it's reducible, probably can't be stopped completely. And anyway, the border wall doesn't affect me. I don't live in the United States, and I'm not likely to visit again for a long time. I've not been there for many moons. But I just don't think it's a sensible way to spend money. Obviously, not my decision.